Hey YouTube, this is Ben Gessel. How's it going? This is kind of a part two to this deeper subject that I'm talking about here. All these folks that are in the arts and humanities and media that have been a little bit more willing to uh, go places that most of us are a little more comfortable with going, a little more uncomfortable with, regarding, yeah, just talking about gross stuff, and then also, particularly evil subjects. Yeah, all that stuff, and I don't know, like, how can I put this? Um, so I was mentioning, I mentioned a few folks. Let's go through the list again. Who I was talking about? Oh, by the way, I should mention one person before I go through this list again, because this is a pretty good list. Let's talk about William Friedkin and making. Well, he did The Exorcist. I mean, that's usually what he's known for. But he's did other. I'm sure he did other movies, but that was a huge, gigantic undertaking. So, talking about one of the darkest movies ever made. I don't even think I need to even mention how dark it is. It kind of speaks for itself. But you know, how can I put this? You guys need to, if you haven't already, and I'd only recommend this if you're at a certain age. If you're below a certain age, you will know what I'm talking about. Don't check this stuff out if you're like not even. Oh man, wait till you're 18 for crying out loud. Just trust me on this. Be 16 or 17 for crying out loud. Um, you'll thank me for it after. You know, if you're older than that, okay, But even then, exercise caution with this stuff, please, because Friedkin, he was not interested in making just another cheesy horror movie. He was not interested in half-hearting and doing this half-hearted at all. Not even no. He was going to be Stanley Kubrick, man, and he was going to go for it. He was all about the realism, about supernatural in this regard, and so you see real evil in that movie, and associated with that train of thought. Okay, I don't want to get into gross stuff, but basically, some of the reason why some of the content in that movie is so off-putting has everything to do with what Friedkin knew. Even though, how can I put this? Um, there are things. Oh man, I don't know how to put this. I guess I'm gonna have to have you guys refer to the videos themselves. I just don't. I don't want. There are things that freaking. Well, sure. When you're talking to most people in this world, most people, vast majority of them, just don't want to talk about certain things. Even some of the scummiest people that you'll run into really don't want to talk about some things because of how truly sick and evil certain things that you could say and do are. And there are moments in that movie that are not only terrifying. Well, some of them are just very terrifying. Other things are straight up just evil things. I won't say what they are. I definitely won't. I still won't. I won't go there. Um, but you have to ask the question: why did William Friedkin include that stuff? Um, it's it's loathsome morally, right? Yeah, it's rated R for a reason. If there's anything I've mentioned in this last video, I know there's probably some things that definitely are like, nope. If you're Mormon, if you're, yeah, how can I put this? Not just if you're Mormon. there are some things that are offensive to any entities that are celestial, like angels. If you want angels around you, they won't be around you when you're watching that level of stuff. So then there's always the question of, yeah, again, is it the movie? Is it certain parts of a movie? Is it the way a director is spiritually? William Friedkin wanted to show, like Stanley Kubrick, he wanted to go there. Some people ask the question: is it because of Friedkin? Was he messed up? Why was he so messed up to make something like this kind of movie? And he said he wanted to show what evil really was. That evil really exists. This kind of level of evil, not the kind of evil that you see in comic books for kids like Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor, sure, you can make him a little scummier than. I mean, when it's the kids' comic books, you'd be like, "I'll get you next time, Superman," or that kind of thing. You can make him more real life, scuzzy guy. Did the same thing with the Joker. The Joker started out as kind of a clowny jester, and they bit by bit made him whatever. And personally, I never found thugs to be intimidating, just because they're bigger or younger, bigger, more muscly, whatever. That's not intimidating. What's intimidating is something else. That's no subject. Anyway. I'm sorry, I'm getting trained on these tangents here. But what we're talking about here, again, Friedkin wanted to make a movie that showed real evil. Like 100% evil. Like demon level. And he was not having anything that was not going to cut it. I mean, he was not having anything short of that. So because that was his goal, I mean, that's why this movie's so terrifying. And so you ask the question, so if he wanted to make a more righteous movie, if he wanted to make a better movie for families, a more wholesome movie, how could you treat that subject matter and make it more appropriate for, not without traumatizing people, right? Without people being traumatized and running away from theaters when it first came out. Can you do such a thing? Well, that's a very good question. And ultimately, I mentioned some dark folks. And by the way, in case you didn't see the first part of this, by all means, see the first part. If at some point, anyway. But let me just go through some of the folks I've mentioned already. I'm talking about Stephen King, talking about a little bit of Tim Curry and Jack Nicholson, sure. Talking about their slight differences and the strengths and how they play Joker versus Pennywise in the past. And I'm talking about a little bit of Cesar Romero, just touched him briefly. But also, I could have also talked about Anthony Hopkins as well. How he played Hannibal Lecter and stuff, and he played him like he was playing an animal. Just the way that his gaze is so direct, and is just yeah. I mean, you see Anthony Hopkins also plays a demon in I don't know, The Rite or something. He plays a priest that is possessed by a demon and stuff, that sort of thing. So Anthony's got a side to him that he can do that stuff. Yeah. But They also mentioned some composers. I think touched on some rock guys, but more. Mentioned Antonin Xanadu, briefly Lester Crowley, of course, and I have to go back and anyway. Those are some of the people I talked about in the first video. Yeah. There's probably some others I can't remember right now off the top of my head, but I could mention Alfred Hitchcock maybe a little bit. But Hitchcock, I'll get back to the Exorcist train of thought here in a sec. I mentioned scary composers like, Lalo Schifrin, Christopher Young, Richard Bellis. And also I mentioned Woody Allen and Roman Polanski. So, so many things to mention here. Um, by the way, the girl that played Reagan was traumatized and had to get psychiatric help after the movie. You see the same thing that happened to Shelley Duvall in The Shining. Why was that? You know, these are questions that are hard to ask. I personally don't think Stanley Kubrick or William Friedkin were. I don't see them as bad people. But they had to get the results that they had to get for what their project was all about. But in the cases of The Shining and The Exorcist especially, both these movies are very, very dark. Very dark. So the very first thing, and you're just happy to get a job as an actor, actress. It's a big deal. Everyone says that Heath Ledger, committed suicide because he played the Joker, by the way, and all that stuff. And Jack Nicholson kind of, hinted, I warned him, right? Well, that's not really what this video is about, but I mention this because is also it's a dark thing too. And by the way, I've come to the conclusion that Heath was exhausted, and he just was a little bit, he was a little careless with drugs, and that's how he died. So he didn't commit suicide; it was accidental. I mean, it wasn't intentional. Heath was a psychologically much healthier person, much more robust and able to. He wasn't like scarred for life from playing the Joker. Nicholson actually liked Heath, of course. It's just that Nicholson knew that if you play the Joker, the darker you go, so it's something as simple as just being so exhausting. It took everything out of Heath. He was probably just like, comatose, after they were done. He was so happy that he did such a good job, Whatever. You guys leave me thoughts and comments on that. I understand that discussion is still going on. What caused Heath's death, and was it suicide or was it something else? And was Jack Nicholson being mean when he said that? No, he wasn't. He was just it's Nicholson, man. Nicholson sometimes is just he doesn't mean to be rude or doesn't mean to be direct, but he has a direct side to him. Even though he's not, he says he has a sensitive side too. He does have a sensitive side. He can be very considerate. He's just kind of a grump sometimes too. We understand that about Nicholson. Okay, let's move. Sorry, I got to move on. Let's get back to Friedkin and The Exorcist because as far as movies go, it does. Oh yeah, I mentioned H.P. Lovecraft as well in the last video. So yeah, so the girl that played Reagan had to get therapy, and there's always the question of there's a lot of questions, not just one. But one of the questions is, what is the morality of making such a dark movie? You're trying to expose real evil, or evil on that level. You're trying to teach people that these extremes do exist. You have extreme good and you have extreme evil. And, you can get into the theology of it and all that stuff, but it's again, these kinds of things, these kinds of movies beg the question, Is it okay to make that kind of movie or that kind of whatever? And it's a complicated question. I can't give you a solid yes or no answer. Morally, I'd say no, it's not right. But Les Miserables was a very dark, story. Very, very dark. Very scary, some terrible characters in there. Yet one of the prophets in our church, Ezra Taft Benson, said it was one of the greatest books ever written. So sometimes if you have a movie that has both very, very awesome highs and very dark lows, that kind of thing can be made, I think. It's just that it was the musical version of Les Miserables that was probably more off-color than the book itself. So, be that as it may, yeah. So getting back to the, is it okay to make these R-rated movies and to expose evil for what it really is? So again, my moral answer to that is, no, it's not okay. It's not morally okay. But, I could see the other side. Is it okay because it gives you a huge scare, and maybe it'll teach you a little bit about theology. The Omen, was directed by Richard Donner. We know Richard Donner directed Superman. Of course, most grown adults are very versatile. They're very intelligent. They can make very dark movies, very light movies, or kid appropriate movies, whatever. I don't know. Dick Donner. So, but yeah, he directed The Omen. Gregory Peck himself. Gregory Peck, he's like Jimmy Stewart. He's like one of those guys that you usually think of as being a very upstanding type of actor. But he liked the script. And so he's, The Omen, very religiously oriented. But The Omen has some dark moments. Now, a lot of times you could say, if you're comparing The Omen with The Exorcist, because they both have to do with evil, and demons, that sort of thing, whether or not you agree with Omen's theology, you could say one movie is more appropriate, more tasteful, the other one less so. You can definitely make that argument, morally, or, what's appropriate for different ages. But me personally, I wouldn't show The Omen to anybody younger than... I don't think it's right to show The Omen to anyone younger than 16, 15, 16. Any younger than that, they're too impressionable. Even 14, even your... No. I wouldn't. But The Exorcist, you've got to be 18, man. Yeah, at least. And 18, 19-year-olds are going to be like, oh my gosh, if they haven't seen it before. I mean, The Exorcist 1 and Exorcist 3, Rosemary's Baby, Wicker Man, some of the most insanely dark movies ever made. Insanely. And The Wicker Man is so subtly that way. Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, both those movies are so obviously dark. Wicker Man is... the reason why it's so dark is because you never suspect it. It's so subtle. Everything is so subtle about the movie, the way it progresses. That's why it's such a masterful movie. But there is a scene that you want to fast forward if you want to avoid some inappropriate stuff, right? Of course. Wicker Man is also British production. Anything from Britain, Europe in general, but Britain is going to be... they do things... Europe, they do things differently. And I like it a lot of times, but not always 100% of the time. But it's often said that, I guess you could say, sexual morals are more loose in Europe compared to the United States in modern times. In modern times. It wasn't always that way, but yeah, modern times, it just, yeah. Anyway, so again, getting past the is it right or wrong to make movies that are that dark, which I lean more toward it's wrong, but there are some saving graces and redeeming values in these great movies because they cover such they're great movies. They cover such a wide variety of emotions and moods, and they're so deeply psychological, and they're very satisfying that way. So very satisfying emotionally, intellectually, fuel for nightmares, of course. So they're beefier that way. They're meatier. So in that case, they're going to be very substantial, very, very substantial, very much so, but still very dark. And so, yeah. What else was I going to mention here about this stuff? But William Friedkin, no, I'm not going to say this. You guys are going to have to look this up. It's just not very tasteful to mention this stuff. So, let me see here. Getting into some other composers, like Stravinsky, and maybe Wagner. It's often said that Wagner's racist. Okay, he had Jewish friends, but he talked about Jewishness in music, and we see racism as being so evil these days, and it is evil. But there's a. I don't want to get into that right now. By the way, I've talked about this subject before a little bit. There is a hierarchy of sins. There's a hierarchy of evil. Where you feel like racism falls in that hierarchy is up to you. But where push comes to shove is obviously when you start actually hurting people and, I mean, traumatizing people. So, it's different how you act toward a grown adult who, and you just you accidentally say a few things that are not so thoughtful, not so nice, that are racist. You apologize, of course. That act is much less serious than if you actually were to chew out a little kid and use racist terms when talking to that kid. That's more serious. It takes a lot more apologizing, a lot more. And I can't think who would do that. Who would do that? But I mention all this stuff because we're talking about Wagner. We're talking about, on some level, Wagner's love of blonde, blue-eyed, Germanic ideals and stuff. You hear in his music, it's hinted at. Most people generally hear more of a heroic, kind of like the saga. It's the Viking saga thing, or it's like the story that keeps going, right? The Ring cycle, this epic journey, and you hear the brass suggests Northern Europe, that sort of thing. There's all these elements present in Wagner's music, and it's such a grand scale, huge orchestra. He spent so much time writing, and it's his life's work, and so he poured his whole soul into it. You hear every bit of Wagner's emotions, and yes, he was very intense, and yes, he could be very angry, yes, he could be a total scuzzbag, but more especially, I think he's just not a very pleasant person. And by the way, not people know this. Not people know this as well. But Chopin wasn't very fond of Jews as well. We just never suspect these things about Chopin because he was such an introvert compared to Wagner in a way, or he was so private about so many of these things. There's so many of these things that we just don't know about until we know about it. And does it totally change the way we think about these people? Come on. In the past, people were more racist. I think people need to realize this. You can't judge people in earlier times the same way we judge people now. It's impossible. They're two different time periods. And this is Europe we're talking about. In Europe, I mean, in the 1800s? Are you kidding me? No, they thought about people completely differently than we talk about people now. It's a very different place. A very, very different place. I'm not saying it's bad. You can think of it if it's bad or racist if you want to. That's fine. It's not that way. And so life is more complex than that. I wish people would realize that. I wish that, morals have a complexity to them. Now they're still clear right and wrong, and it's not always easy to see how serious something is, bad or evil, good or evil. We have our own cultural or whatever. Our world kind of shapes our thoughts here somewhat, but we still know on some level what's right and wrong. We know that murder is much more serious than theft. If you're talking about murder where it's premeditated and the person didn't, it's not a crime of passion and stuff. We can say there's a consensus that, stealing a car is less serious than killing someone in cold blood, right? We can agree on that. But I mentioned Wagner because, there's some pretty dark stuff. It's just more dramatic in his music. And so, that's Wagner. And he was kind of a grump. Getting to Stravinsky, with Stravinsky, you're talking about, and then of course he's after Wagner. And every time you have these composers that were after composers, they had heard their music probably, or it influenced them on some level. And Stravinsky's music, we're talking about, there's the whole Rite of Spring thing and the riots and things, if you're familiar with that stuff. But Stravinsky was like, okay, so there's some of these guys that go there, that go dark. Some of these guys that go there, and we're talking about music, talking about movies, talking about even visual art, like, was it Salvador Dali that did all the grotesque paintings? I don't know. There's a guy, I think they're the very harrowingly dark looking paintings. Whether they're artists or musicians or movie directors or actors or whatever, whoever. There's more than one approach, there's more than two approaches to making anything darker. On the one hand, you can totally invest every part of your soul. You can be emotionally involved. You can be spiritually involved. It's your whole being is in it. And for those kinds, and I'm that kind of person when I get really into something, right? I'm there. I'm fully there. Everything. I shut everything else out, and that's usually how I am when I'm composing, or at least it's hard to be completely that way because that's why everybody likes to compose, like myself in the evening if we're up to it, or we like to compose when we know there's going to be some unbroken time because you don't like to be interrupted at every turn because sometimes these feelings and thoughts are just coming and you have to get them down on paper before they go. Anyway, it's a big hassle. being a artiste, and it's hard. But the thing is, yeah. But other than being fully invested in something, you can actually also be very detached. If you know what you're doing, and you know the effect you're after, you can do anything in the arts, humanities, whatever, media. You can make anything. They can be just people say, "Whoa, that's just like that was the scariest movie I ever saw," or that was just wow. That was I got tingles or whatever, or whatever it is. People were very impressed by how positive or negative, whatever it is that was made. But the person that made it, if they're skilled enough in their craft, they don't have to be fully in that frame of mind. I bet you, if anything, I don't know. And you can ask. Richard Bellis talks about this stuff. If you were to ask Richard Bellis, the composer who did it, 1990, thing on TV, made for TV, movie, you'd ask him how was he fully in that movie? And that movie, we're talking about a movie that's still scary, but not quite the level of The Exorcist, right? Now, by the way, why Wallace Schifrin was fired from The Exorcist making a movie. He saw the footage and it was just like, this is just like insanely scary and evil. So he wrote the most insanely evil and scary music he could come up with. And it was insanely evil and dark and scary. And it's so dark and scary that William Friedkin was just like, this is too much. This is definitely going to traumatize people. I don't want people to be traumatized necessarily, every single person. I want people to be scared out of their wits, but not like, holy crud. So Friedkin was actually worried that it was going too far. That's the only reason why he fired Schifrin. In my opinion, he might as well have just gone with it. Anyway, so but if you were to talk to Richard Bellis and ask him, was he fully there? He would say yes, he was intellectually. Like he knew he was certainly operating on all cylinders. It goes without saying, he knew precisely what he was doing. But if you were to ask him, were you emotionally like scared out of your wits at certain points in the movie with Pennywise, and were you when you were coming up with your score and you're writing all these cues and stuff? I mean, like was it hard emotionally to do because it was so frightening, so dark? I think he'd probably say something like that. Now, I don't know. I'm not Richard Bellis, but if I had to guess, I think he'd probably say, on some level, it would have been, yeah. But, he was the composer. He wasn't like one of the actors. He wasn't in Tim Curry's position where he had to play a 100% evil character. And so, there's things you have to do, by the way, for at least the vast majority of humanity, if you're playing a very dark character, just to stay sane. And this is why, Jack Nicholson probably loved the jokes as playing the Joker, because it made it more fun. If you're having fun, then it'll be much more enjoyable to play the role. But playing an evil character, it's fun. Tim Curry enjoys those evil characters, but none of them are like Pennywise. And it's the evil side of the evil character that can be not so fun. Because when you're fully invested in something like that and you start feeling the darkness of the character, that darkness is not fun. True darkness is not. And so on that level, Richard Bellis would be like, yeah, there's a side to whatever was going on here that was hard that way. I'm sure he'd say something like that, but he'd probably say again, I wasn't probably, as far as that project, as far as it, uh, he'd probably say I wasn't like probably the most influenced, or it wasn't as hard to go through that stuff. Maybe even compared to Tommy Wallace, Tommy Wallace, the director, or even some of the other actors. Probably said that they probably had it harder than he did. But and it's true that Richard Bellis's score is it's effective and it's dark. It hits all the right points. But if you compare it with what Lala Schifrin did with The Exorcist, yeah, I mean, and it's really stinking hard to write something as dark as Schifrin did. And if you want to talk about really dark and scary music, I mean, Schifrin's original score of The Exorcist, is probably one of the 10 scariest things I've ever heard in my entire life. You can always have pitch bends and things. They use that in the medieval horror. And by the way, Schifrin did the medieval horror, which is why he was hired to do The Exorcist. So mentioning all this stuff, it's like this is one of our safeguards as composers, by the way, is that if you intellectually know how to do something, it works harmonically, you can kind of not be as fully invested in something super dark, right? And it's the same deal with actors. I think actors have much more real for them. So they have to, they have to have thick skin, and directors, holy cow. I cannot imagine being Stanley Kubrick. I am not Stanley Kubrick. That, that guy is fearless. He's absolutely fearless. I mean, what phobias does the man have? I'm sure he has them. But wow, what a, and then he did Full Metal Jacket. He's a tough dude. Just a gutsy guy. Holy crap. And then some. He's like one of the thickest skinned guys in Hollywood, probably, but at the same time, so thoughtful about, and so very, very bright. But the sensitive side to Kubrick, but the main thing about Kubrick again was his insistence that everything was a certain way. You had to have it this standard. So to sum this all up here, I guess, what am I trying to say? There's a lot to say, and I hope I don't run out of time here. It's just that, again, the morality of these things, when it comes down to how good and evil of these different people that make these things, or the actual things that make themselves, we all have to make a decision as to whether or not we're going to see or listen or hear or do something. We're going to have to make a decision, and if we